All right, welcome back to another episode of Maddog Masterclass. And this one we're looking at the old school Canadian Marconi and PMS FMS system, flight management system. This is an older version that was used when the 82 first came out. Usually a lot of aircraft, I think, retrofitted to the Honeywell as they got more sophisticated ones. Some never did. I know some people flying for American, I know they were using the Canadian Marconi for a long time. I don't know if all of their aircraft ever got upgraded or any of them did or how that worked. So, but it's a cool way to fly the aircraft. However, I do not recommend using this if you're still trying to learn the MD-80. I think learn the MD-80 on the Honeywell. It's a more traditional FMC. That was the previous video that we did on the FMC. This is more of like if you want to challenge, I think. I think it's a cool way to fly the aircraft. I really like it once you understand it, but because it adds another element of challenge to your flying. But if you're more of the Airbus, I want to push buttons and have the aircraft do everything for me, this one's not really for you. So, but hey, it's good to learn how to do it anyway. So for those of you that are hardcore MD-80 fans like myself, this is your primer on the Canadian Marconi and PMS FMC. If you have questions or comments for the video, please put those in the comments section below. You can also join the Discord, which is a much better way to ask questions. The link is in the description below. So please feel free to correct me if I've got anything wrong. It's a little harder to find some of the details on the Marconi. So learning just how the right way to do this is a little funny, and I still think there's a few features that aren't quite working right in here or aren't missing maybe. But maybe they're not. Maybe this is totally how it was. I don't know. It's hard to find some data on this one, and there's even fewer people that know how to fly it in the sim. So I post on the forums on something on this, and like it's just silent. So it's really been reading manuals and trial and error, and I think I've got it down for the most part. So that's what I'm going to teach you today. I do stream over on Twitch every week, multiple days a week, twitch.tv/Mustafa. Would love to see you over there. Join the community. You can also ask questions directly of me. And with that, let's get right into it. So where we left last, we finished doing the pre-flighting for the aircraft. So the aircraft is completely powered up. Everything is done. I've gone through and done all the overhead panel stuff and all the tests and various things. So we're all ready to go. We just need to load the aircraft and load the FMC. And even though we did do the ACARS last time, we're going to do it again just for the sake of continuity here. Also, I can't do these flights in the same breath because, one, they're two separate FMCs, and so I have to do the flight twice. But also, I tried to reset, and it freaked out on me, so I had to reset the entire aircraft. So it's just what it is. It's not designed to go back and forth like that. So come over here. You're going to start. Always check your technical log and make sure you've gotten that up to snuff. In order for that to work, you do have to have your doors open, which I thought I clicked on just there. We go. Your doors open, and if you need GPU or AC power, you can get those here. If you have GSX, the GPU you have to do through the GSX menu. The AC external you can do here. Boarding is going to be done through GSX, unless, again, you're not using GSX integration, in which case you'll have the option to do that here after we do this step, which is the weight and balance. I would remind you again, use this or use the load manager. Don't use both. They fight each other. So I recommend just using this or the FMC, and I'll show you where to go and do that in a moment. But we're going to do the SimBrief OFP. I already have that loaded in. There it is. You can also import it if you don't use SimBrief or you're not sure about the integration. You can just download it and then import it once you put it in the right place. We talked about that in a previous video. Please go watch the video number 1, the introduction to this aircraft, to see how to do that. All right, that's in. The next step now, we come over here to our Canadian Marconi, and we're going to do the ACARS. I do want to introduce you while I'm here, though, to the PMS. This is a blank spot. When you have the Honeywell, when you have the Marconi, though, this is your vertical device, and this is your horizontal or lateral device. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit here. Okay, so we're going to come over here to the ACARS. Once again, I like to use the ACARS on one and the FMS on the other. You can do everything on one of them. You can do them all on this one, or split them. It does not matter. This is a personal preference of mine, so just know you don't have to just do the ACARS here. It only says active and not active here because I clicked on it already once and I clicked on this already once. That's the only reason it says that. The last thing before we do this, though, we want to get our people loading. Again, if you loaded it through the tablet, great. If you have GSX, you'll want to do it this way. If you do it through the tablet, it doesn't matter. But if you do it through GSX, I recommend you do request refueling first, because otherwise the baggage loading guys will get in the way of the refueler and you'll lose a bunch of time. So request refueling, it's going to ask for what services we want to use there. And then once we verify that the refueling is requested, then we can go ahead and say request boarding. And we've already loaded in, obviously, on the tablet, so all that's done. It's going to know what to do. SimBrief's locking in on that. Okay, so we're going to go to the air cards. I do want to make one note here. If you want to change the color or the parallax on here, you go to page 2. I'm not going to do that because I've recorded this video intro 3 times now, because there is a bug with this particular build where once you go into there, it screws up the FMC and you have to reset the sim. So, if you're watching this and you are beyond, actually, let me tell you, for the sake of science, I'm going to do this. If you are past build 1.2 B169, then hopefully this has been fixed. But if you're in this build, do not use those options using the Canadian Marconi. It will bork your system. Do it and then reload the system and it should hold those settings. We're just going to go straight to the ACARS because I'm tired of doing this intro over and over again. AOC standard, pre-flight, and then we go to init data, and this basically works exactly like the Honeywell. We just do init request, again assuming you've done your importings through the load manager there. If you did not import a flight plan, whether that through SimBrief or import manually, this will not function. You have to manually enter all this data yourself. If you, that's if you just like use the load manager and something to load your aircraft, or even just use the tablet but just input the data yourself, then you're going to have to import those fields yourselves. But otherwise, you can use that import. Weight and balance, we're going to get that off the flight plan like we had before. And in case you did not see the Honeywell video, again, for the sake of fairness, over here on the SimBrief, this is the briefing preview. I'm using the Delta layout, so if you use Lido or something else, the numbers will be available, but they'll be in a different spot, and you have to find them. So we're looking for our taxi fuel, which is right here, our trip fuel, which is right here, and our block fuel, which is right there. Okay, so we have 7997 for the trip fuel. Whoops. It gave us a crew message already here. Let's go back to pre-flight, weight and balance. 7997. Taxi fuel is 800. And the block fuel is 2130. And these numbers you don't need to round. You can put them in as is. Send, return, and then we'll hit the flight plan button. And if we go to receive messages now, we have the crew message, which is our preliminary weights. Again, if in the load manager you are using the failures and random loadouts option, your preliminary weights may differ from your initial. Preliminary should match your flight plan. Your final may be a little bit different to simulate whether or not somebody didn't make it on the plane or some extra people got on or whatever. And so you always want to use your final numbers in that case. All right, so we're just going to leave that there. It's probably actually going to back out when the flight plan shows up, which just happened. So there was our flight plan. You can see that there. Again, not necessary to do that, but it's just kind of cool to have it in there. All right, they're loading the plane. Once the loading's done, we'll get a final flight plan, a load sheet, but we've got the initial in there for now. And you can see fuel is loading right here on the fuel page. All right, so now we're going to go over to the FMS. And again, this is a little different than the Honeywell, but the process is kind of similar. So FMS, you'll notice that it starts out in a page that looks very much like the index page, ident, POSINET, all that stuff. So we'll start with ident, and again, it will guide us through. And again, we're looking for the correct AIRAC data on here. That's really the only thing we're checking on the Canadian Marconi. And again, it's AIRAC data that you expect. So if you're not keeping up to date, which I recommend you do through Navigraph, but if not, if you're flying on VATSIM, at least update once a year, which means it'll cost you about $9-10 a year to do that. I think that's totally reasonable, and it'll keep your AIRAC to date at least within a year currency. So just make sure this matches what you expect. In my case, I keep it up to date every time the AIRAC updates. So this is current for me, August 10th to September 7th. It's currently the 14th. We're good. So POSINIT, which is position initialization. And again, this thing is going to basically do it for you. It uses an AHRS system. It doesn't have the reference stuff that the Honeywell did. So you're just going off the GPS and going, yep, I guess that looks right. So what you would do is you would reference this with the GPS coordinates for the airport chart and just verify that that's good. Shows the date here and the UTC time. We go over to route, and this is where it's going to get a little tricky. I recommend for the Marconi, if you have a route that includes airways, to do the company route, because it'll put everything in for you. Because there's no way to enter airways on this. You have to enter in all the individual waypoints on that airway. That's one of the downsides of the older technology. So if you you can do the company route if you do the import from SimBrief, or if you did a manual import from SimBrief or PFPX or something like that. If you just came up with a route off the top of your head, then there's no company route to do. You're going to have to do it manually. So, and I've done it both ways. It's not that excruciating, but it is something to be aware of. So we're going to put our origin in here. And again, if you do the company route, you don't need to input these. It'll do it for you. So in fact, let's do that, because that's the preferred method for the Marconi. So let's do KLAS. Oops, that's an R. KLAS and KSJC. Now, I mentioned in the last one that the keyboard on the Honeywell FMC is a little infuriating because they add an extra row. It goes to F. Most of the Boeing and Airbuses go to E, I believe. So they're a little bit longer, but they're skinnier. The Honeywell goes to F, so your keys aren't in the right place, so you find yourself fumbling. You just saw me fumbling again because this one goes to G. So they made it even thinner and wider. They made it wider and shorter. So it's kind of infuriating. It's a mild thing. It's your first world problems, but there you go. So KLAS, KSJC, we're going to put that in company route. You see it filled in our origin destination, and it now lit up our execute buttons because it's going, hey, you added stuff in, do you want to execute? On this particular model, while I don't necessarily recommend you do it on a Honeywell, anytime you do something and make a change, execute it. Because if you erase, it will erase everything back to that hasn't been executed previously. And that gets really infuriating if you make a mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that right now. You'll see the erase option goes away. And now if we go, we can look at company routes, which is right there. I'm not sure why that's a thing, but that's where it goes. So it just dead ends us there. So we're going to go to the legs page, and we're going to look at the legs. The legs are very simplistic. It's Kino and Rust Me. That's all it's got. And that's all it's going to do for the Honeywell, too, because that's the only part of the route. It's not going to do SIDS and stars. You have to do that. If you're putting this in manually and you had airways in here, you wouldn't have a place to put the airway in. You're going to have to just put in the all the waypoints on that route. And the reason is, on the route page, you notice there's no place here to input the route like you do on the Honeywell. You input the route on the legs page. And if you're familiar with Boeing and Airbus legs pages, there's really no place to do airways on there. You do that through the route page. So it's a weird design. But again, this is a forerunner to the Honeywell. It's an older version. So they didn't know about a lot of fancy stuff yet. So we need to do departure arrival. So departure arrival. So really the way to think about this in a certain sense is to kind of just go across the buttons here, although it's not entirely accurate, and I'll explain that in a minute. But route, departure arrival, we'll do departure. Again, start with the runway. On the Marconi, it's really important to start with the runway. It'll like bork things if you start with the SID over here. So you've got to give it the runway first. So we're going to do 26 right from what we know about the weather and ATIS today. And it's the Joker 3 and the Kino transition. Again, you can leave the transition blank if you're not doing the Kino. You would just leave it blank and execute it as is. Sometimes there's an option for no transition or something like that, and if that's the case, you need to hit that in order to get the execute to light up. So execute that. So now we see that it's active and active on runway 26 right. So there we go. Whoops, right back to menu. Didn't mean to do that. Back to FMS. Departure arrival. All right. Something to note here, by the way, if I go to departure arrival, if I'm in departure and it comes back to this page, and I'm used to hitting departure arrival to get back to the departure arrival screen, it doesn't do anything. You have to hit this little button down here that says departure arrival. Just be aware of that. All right, so back onto arrival now for San Jose. Again, we're going to pick the runway first, ILS 30 left. We're going to do the Razor 5 as per our flight plan, and Rusmy is obviously our transition. And you can check the charts, but I happen to know Clyde is what we're going to use for the transition point there. They're all selected. We're going to execute that, and that's good to go. We could go back to departure arrival if we need to, but we really would just go back to route or legs and verify all of our legs are in here and that we don't have any discontinuities. All right, that's all set up. Now, you'd also want to check your speed and altitude restrictions. It's not as critical to check them in this because this is really just a reference. I mentioned this is older technology. There is no VNAV in this. There is a profile button, but it does not follow your restrictions in the FMC because it's going to use this for your vertical profile, not this. This is only lateral profile. So this is more just so you can have an easy reference to what your restrictions are. All right, so legs is done. We then jump back to init ref, and you have to go down to perf init to do the perf init stuff, which is much simpler than on the Honeywell. There's just the transition altitude. It wants your cruise wind and your cruise true airspeed. It doesn't even want your cruise level because it doesn't care. This isn't doing anything vertical. So we're just going to do the wind, which I showed the other guys, so we'll show you in the other video. On the SimBrief flight plan summary, you have average wind right here, which is basically you can think of as your cruise wind, and then your ICE deviation, which we're going to get into somewhere else. I don't remember if that's in here. Oh, no, we need that for the PMS. So the cruise true airspeed is something you're going to get off of your briefing here. And in the Delta case, it's right here, TAS, true airspeed, 474. So you got to look in a few different places. It can kind of be annoying, but it is what it is. So cruise wind, which I've already forgotten, was 173.31. 173.31. And that true airspeed was 474. I'll put those right there. And that is it. There's no V speeds to put in here, none of that, because again, this isn't doing anything vertical or speed-wise. It's very rudimentary, and that's why I recommend not using this when you're learning the aircraft. Learn this later. And so if you're here for that, great. You've got the progress page here that you want to be aware of. It works very similar to the progress page in the Honeywell. It'll give you your from waypoint, your next waypoint, and if you hit the next page here, it will give you progress toward your destination, your distance, and your stuff there. You can enter a waypoint to get a progress here. This is very helpful for working with the PMS. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And then you can also see the data, headwinds, crosswinds, and all that, magnetic variation, what have you. So that's all here on the progress page. Very nice, but there it is. Also, the hold section is very kind of similar to the Honeywell. As I explained the Honeywell one, the last time I tried to use the hold function in the Canadian Marconi, it did not work very well. It's kind of iffy. So I'm hoping that's something they fixed. I did bring that up with Leonardo, and so I'm not sure if that's been fixed in the latest update. We're going to try it. If it's not, I'll let them know. It's still not working. So we'll see if that's going to work for us. Fix works the same way as it does in the Honeywell. It allows you to build a fixed point and do range rings and stuff like that for that. And then brightness is just to deal with brightness. As you can see, it's changing right there. And I think it just loops through whatever it does right there. Very simple. Execute light, previous and next, and the rest is just the keyboard. So, like I said, it's a very rudimentary. In the init page here, if you go to next, there's your services and fuel and all that stuff. So if you're not using the tablet, this is where you can do the tablet stuff in here. Again, it's in the FMS section itself and under there. All right, so we're going to go back to our legs page. I'm just going to do that because now we need to talk about the dreaded PMS, Performance Management System, I believe is what it stands for, not a woman's time of the month. So, although depending on your attitude for this aircraft, you might consider it that. I don't know. So this is going to be helping with our vertical profile. So usually after we set this up, we come down here and deal with this. Now, it's good to get some information, which you can get off of this, and something I didn't do because we were talking about FMCs, but we will do it here, is you need to set your zero fuel weight, and usually it's best to set your final zero fuel weight here, which we just got. What timing? So load sheet will acknowledge this, and our zero fuel weight is 114,163. So you notice this is showing gross weight. The minute we start spinning this, it's going to switch to zero fuel. So 114,163, and we'll just get it close. I believe if you hold, I think it's tab, you can make this go faster, but I have tab bound to my flow widget, so I just deal with it. It's not that bad. 114,163. That's going to be as close as we're going to get. 114,150. So now you can see that our fuel plus our zero fuel weight has given us our gross weight of 134,100. What do you know? Now minus the taxi fuel, which is about 800 pounds, this should go down to about 134,300 pounds, or sorry, 133,300 or so, if I can do math. So that's going to be good for us to know in a moment. And our fuel, which is right about 20,000 pounds, again, we're burning some of it right now with the APU and stuff, is going to be that. So we come down here, and it's kind of looks confusing, but it's a very simple way to go through this. You start with plan. We're going to hit plan right there, and it's going to ask us for our gross weight, our fuel, and our trip. Now notice this is gross weight, not takeoff weight. So we're going to give it gross. So that's what it is now, 134.1. Now this does not say kilograms. This says kilopounds, which is basically you're giving it weight in thousands of pounds. The K is confusing. If you're in kilograms, and this is in kilograms or anything, this will say T for tons. So that's how you know you're in kilograms. So don't confuse the two. It's kind of a weird way to do it, but it's thousands of pounds because, you know, K is kilos, 1,000, which sounds like kilograms. So I know it's confusing. All right, so 134.1, again, we're decimalizing it, and we push the little key right there next to it. Fuel, we're going to round to 20.0, put the fuel in, and then it wants the trip distance. Now, you can get this off the flight plan, but I recommend getting it off of this after you've put all your flight plan in. I think this is going to be a little bit more accurate. So I go into progress, and we go to next page, and we see our destination is 388. That's not as the crow flies, that's through the flight plan. So we're going to give it 388 nautical miles. I'm going to put that there. All right. That is opened up. You see that we got another page now. And this is your page button, which seems odd that it's a toggle, but that's your page button. So we're going to page down. And now we have altitudes, wind component, and temp or deviation of flight level. So what does this mean? So altitudes is your cruise altitude. But if you know you're going to be doing like step climbs, you could put multiple ones in here. I have never done that. I've always just done the one. So our flight level today is 300. So we're just going to do the one. If you wanted to do extra, do 300 and then do a slash and then do 320 or whatever it is. You can tell it you're going to step up. Wind component. So this is that average cruise wind, but it's the component of that, not the actual wind. So what is that? Well, thankfully, SimBrief has us covered. Again, I believe if you are using the American flight plan, because they were all about this system, and so their OFP is tailored to this, you'll have that in there. I don't think the Delta one has that. You have to kind of figure it out on your own, and there's ways to kind of guess and make up a number. But SimBrief does it, so why not we just use that? So over here on the flight plan summary, you had the average wind right here. Right next to it is the wind component, +9. That's what this equals based on the direction we're flying on the average. So +9, really easy right there. So if we're doing a plus, we don't need to do anything. We just put 9. If you need to do a minus sign, you see this little button down here? You push that to activate these other little notes. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then the 1 has an L, the 2 has an N, the 3 has an R, the 4 has a W, the 6 has an E, the 7 has a minus, the 8 has an S, and the 9 has a plus. So that's what this key is here. You're going to basically turn this keyboard into those only for the next mouse click. And then it goes away. So you have to click it every time if you wanted to do minus west or something, but I don't know why you would do that. So we're going to hit, we don't need to hit it in this case. I'm going to demonstrate it though. So if we want to do -9, I would click this, I would click the minus. Now we have a minus, and then I would click 9, and that's how we get the 9 there. But we're not going to do that, so I'm going to clear those out, and we're just going to do a plus 9, which means we don't need the plus, we just do the 9, and we do it right there. Plus 9 knots. It figured out that without the plus, it's a plus 9. Here we have an option. We can put the temperature at top of climb, so the top of climb temperature, or we can put the ISO deviation at flight level 300. Either way. So the ISO deviation is plus 15. The top of climb amount, let's see, I think it lists it, it's like minus 30. So we could do minus 30, or what I like to do is I like to use the deviation, which is plus 15. So to do that, we're going to hit the slash first, and then type 15. If it was a minus, if it was a minus deviation, we'd have to hit that minus key, and then the minus, the alternate key, the minus key, and then the 15. So just do the 15, but make sure you do the slash, otherwise it's going to assume the temperature at top of climb is 15C, and that's going to be way hot for flight level 300. You're going to have all kinds of performance problems. The airplane's going to be like, what the heck? And so see, it's figured it out. It's done the calculation. Minus 30 is the same as plus 15C deviation. All right? So that's the plan part done. Here is where it gets confusing, because like I said, this is not a VNAV. We have to trick this into giving us a descent profile. It's already figured out the climb profile because that's simple. The descent profile is where we have to kind of trick it. And so we go to vertical waypoints up here, and then we're going to use the little paddle switch in the up position to see BOD. BOD stands for bottom of descent. This is where we're telling the computer, this is as far as you're going to descend us, and then we're going to do it manually from there. Now, you could set this to be field elevation and the distance to the airport. I don't recommend that, but you can do that. What I recommend doing is setting at the minimum, not the minimum, but the closest into the airport I suggest doing is the final approach fix. So if you have very limited, if you don't have a star that you're doing, and you don't have a lot of information, but you know the final approach fix is 2,000 feet above the field, then you can put in that altitude here and the distance to the FAF and be good. That's the worst case scenario. In this case, we're going to be able to be a little bit more precise than that because of some things. And I'll show you what we're going to do. And actually, to some degree, it's easier doing it that way. When you have a star, you're going to be doing a lot of stuff of your own. So let me explain. And I'm going to have to bring up a chart to do this because that's really the only way to do this justice. So let me kind of do this. This is where this gets a little complicated, and you have to kind of think, at this stage of the flight, what's the best way to do this? And part of it depends on if you're going to have ATC or not, because they're going to do things with you, on their own anyway. So let me pull up the Razor 5, and let's look at this star. So this is the Razor 5. There are a lot of altitude crossing restrictions. This is not a Canadian Marconi friendly star. And in fact, most stars probably aren't going to be. So you have to make a decision. You can tell the aircraft, hey, I want to be at Clyde at 4,000. But that assumes from your top of descent to Clyde a very steady, smooth descent path. Are you going to get that with this? Probably not. Above 240 at Stubble, above 200 at Razor, above 16 at Ouch, above 10 at Nicked, above 8 at Seco, above 5 at Scoper. I mean, it's likely that some of these are dragged out a little bit, and so if you were at 10 at Nicked and you were descending steady, you'd go below 8 before you hit Seco. And below 5, before, it's very possible. Or more likely, because of that, it would have you well above 14 at Nicked. If it was to start you descending at the right time. It may not have you start descending until over here to get you to 4,000 at Clyde. So you see what I'm saying? The star crossing restrictions are not necessarily laid out to account for a very steady down. They're step downs. And this thing isn't going to do that. You can't put in more than one bottom of descent. So what you need to do is figure out what is the most convenient initial spot. And usually the best way to do that is if you have a number of at or aboves, you can kind of ignore those. But the minute you have an at or below, that's where you want to start your planning at. And unfortunately on this one, the at or below is really high and it's really far back. And that's its stubble right here. You have a at or below of 270, which means I have to be below this if I'm going to follow the star, which means I have to tell the computer, hey, you better plan to be, and I wouldn't put 270, I would put 240 at stubble, or even 250, shoot in the middle. Don't put the 270 there. You can do 26, you can do 25. Remember, it's not going to do a perfect job here. It's antiquated, so you're going to have to build in a little bit of a buffer. So I would call it stubble here. And then from then on, you're managing the descent through all of these points on your own. So that's why I said this system is much more hands-on, because it's not going to fly a VNAV down for you. It's not going to follow the speeds. You've got to do all this. So really busy stars, the Marconi's going to be a pain in the butt. I find it a challenge and like it, but I'm kind of crazy that way. So that's what I wanted you to be aware. Now, if you had a star that had like just some of them are like this. It's all just crossing points, and then you have an at like Clyde. Maybe Clyde was 4,000, and that was the only altitude restriction on it. Great, use Clyde as your final point, because that's the first time you have a crossing restriction. So that's how you want to do that. So how do we figure this out and figure out how to tell this where to go? Well, so we're going to use stubble. So we know that now. And notice there's also a 280 knot crossing restriction there. So we want to take note of that too. So how do we do that? We're going to go into our FMC that we already set up. And we're going to go into our legs page, and we're going to find stubble. So there's stubble right there. 280 between 240 and 270. We're going to call it 25. That's what we're going to do. But we're going to line select stubble. We're going to go to progress. And we're going to go next page to this RTA progress, page 3 of 4, and put it right there. Now look what it did. It gave us a distance to stubble from where we are now along our route. This is not as the crow flies. This is along our route. It will take us 287 nautical miles to get to stubble. So we can say 287, perfect. So we're going to click on bottom of descent, and it's going to bring up the bottom of descent page, waypoint BOD. This is the edit page for this. And we need to put in here that stubble, bottom of descent, is this, 287, not 358. It just calculated a random one based on our route size. So what did I say, 287? Yeah. So 287, right there. And then what was the altitude we want to be at? We want to be at 25,000. This one you got to spell all the way out and put that in there. And now our bottom of descent is calculated right here, and it's going to calculate a new top of descent based on that. Now right here is our speed at which we plan to cross that waypoint and the wind at that waypoint. Okay? So speed, and again, this is just going to help it do a better job calculating this descent point. So remember, it said 280, so 280 is the speed, slash, and then the wind is the wind at that point. So how do we figure that? Well, that's going to be complicated. Well, again, thanks to our flight plan and sim brief, we can do this. So I'm going to show you a little trick for how I do this. So looking again at the briefing preview, which is right here, we come down to our flight plan, and below the flight plan, we have descent forecast winds. And we can look at the winds at roughly 25,000 feet. And if we're not using 20,000, we just have to interpolate between different altitudes there. But 25,000 is 140 at 21. So it should be pretty close to that. So that's pretty cool. 14021. So we do 140, again under slash, 21, and we stick that right there. Again, you don't have to do this because it's not going to do this for you. You're still going to have to set 280. It won't fly that. But again, it'll help it calculate better. Now this frequency and frequency radial distance, if you're using a VOR or a localizer, I don't know if a localizer will work, but a VOR will, as your bottom of descent point, you can put the frequency for that VOR right there, and as the aircraft gets in range of that VOR, it will be able to update its distance and better assess its profile based on that. Given the way that most of these work, I've yet to have a VOR be my bottom of descent, so I've never used it. So I just leave that blank. But that's just, again, for calculating. We can update the distance in the computer later on the flight to make sure it's accurate. And if you're flying a vector departure, where ATC could vector you all over the place, or even if you're not flying a vector departure and they do vector you, that number 287 is going to be wrong, because it's going to just start counting. From the time you take off, it's going to calculate how many nautical miles you've gone. So if you go off in the wrong direction for 30 miles and then double back, you're going to be 60 miles different from what your bottom descent calculation is, and your TOD is going to be way early. So you're going to want to update that, and I'll show you in the flight how we update that in flight. But that's basically done. We've got our bottom descent and our plan calculated. We go back to the climb page, and this is all set for us. And that is how we do the FMC for the Canadian Marconi. Now, I mentioned it doesn't have a VNAV. On the Honeywell version, you've got a VNAV button right here. Here we have a perf button. And what this will do is it will calculate a profile for climbing and descending using this, and it will tie it to the speed. You cannot, if you want to go on your own speed, it's going to take you out of perf. These are linked. You can't override this like you can. Like, you have this FMS override button. You can normally FMS override the speed and keep the VNAV working, and you just manage the speed. You can't do that. This FMS override is actually a dummy button in the in the Marconi version. So I wish they would have just blacked this out. But yeah, this doesn't do anything. There's no overriding to be done, because the FMS isn't running your speed. The PMS is. It's the perf that's doing it. And so we'll talk about how I recommend flying this in the different phases of flight when you're using the Marconi, because it's a little tricky to get the best result, but that's how you do it. So it's a little different than the Honeywell. You need some more data, and you got to figure out what your descent point is. And again, you can change those points at any time during your flight, because you can just so, hey, they're going to give me a different thing. We're going to get a different arrival. I'm on a different point. You can load that up, find out what the distance is, and update the distance and get a new top of descent. So, and at the end of the day, you can calculate your own top of descent just using the rule of 3, the difference in the amount of altitude you need to lose, multiply it by 3 and add a 0 to it. And then, take the 0 away. And then that'll give you your approximate mileage, nautical mile distance you should use for your descent, and do it yourself. It's very much like you don't have any vertical nav guidance. You have a little, but it's very rudimentary. And if ATC starts vectoring you, you're abandoning it. You're never going to touch it again. You're done. Just ignore it. You'll use vertical speed and IS Mach hold and all that stuff. So, okay. Again, as we go through the different phases of flight, we'll go through, because I'm going to do the next step here in these courses, is we're going to do a full flight, takeoff, taxi takeoff, climb, cruise, and landing, and I'll do those in each of these. So the first ones will be the Honeywell ones, and the next one will be the Marconi one. So if you want to follow the Marconi one, make sure you do the Marconi one. It's its own flight, because I can't just switch them out in between. And the way you fly this aircraft with those is so different. It's like doing a tutorial for 2 different aircraft. So I have to do this flight twice, which is going to be fun. So that's going to be the next ones. We'll go there next. So if you're doing the Marconi path, you're going to jump to the taxi takeoff for Marconi. And if you're doing the Honeywell ones, then I don't know what you're doing on this video anyway. And you're going to go to the taxi takeoff for the Honeywell ones. Okay? I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, hit that like and subscribe button. Really appreciate it. It helps the channel. Please come and follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Mustafa. Come check out the live streams. It's a lot of fun over there. And we'd love to see you. If you have questions or comments, put them in the comments section down below. If I missed something or got something wrong, feel free to correct me in a loving way. I would appreciate that. I'm not the end-all be-all, but I do know this airplane pretty well. And the best way to ask questions and get involved in the conversation is to join the Discord. And the link for that is in the description as well. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you on the next one.